No.
15 minutes. You know, but we hope to recoup that, right? All right.
Her mic is on.
You know, this
Yes, you got it.
we are continuing. We are continuing with quarterly lesson number 11, unity in worship. And of course, this entire quarter is entitled Oneness in Christ. And this morning we hope to answer some of these questions. Why do we worship? Or what's the definition of worship? And who are we supposed to worship? How are we supposed to worship? And when are we supposed to worship? So as we explore these lessons today, let us focus on, at least answering some of these questions or making them clear in our minds. But before we get into the word, let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you. We are so thankful. And for the blessed gift of Jesus. Thank you, dear Lord, for bringing us safely. Dear Lord, as we go through this, we know you are a good teacher. So lead us, God, into the way that we should go. And magnify your words so that we can have a better and clearer picture of the goodness of you. And may we look forward, to your soon coming. May we never forget who you are, creator or Jesus' name. All right. First of all, what is worship? I looked up in the dictionary for the definition of worship. And these are some of the things I've come up with, and you can add many others. It says reference to a deity. It's not just any deity, these are God. How about honor, with love and extreme submission? And I also saw paying homage. Okay, how about adoration, praise, and glory? And before I move on, did anybody see anything else that I didn't mention? What does it mean to worship? What is the definition of worship?
See, one that is closely connected with worship, and you see it mentioned, these things closely are allied one with another. Mentioned both in the Old and New Testament. In one place, it's Matthew chapter 4, where the devil, speaking to Jesus, said, "All these things I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Jesus says in verse 10, he said, "Then Jesus said unto him, Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve." And you see this even in the Old Testament when sometimes people would go and worship false gods. It would say that they worshipped and served Baal. And so service is connected with worship. Worship is connected with service. So that's another thing that's intrinsically factored.
It was intriguing to me as I reviewed the lesson this week, is that, is there a difference between worship and acts of worship? Is there a difference?
I wouldn't say necessarily that there's a difference. I would say that they're connected to each other. You cannot worship, you cannot just sit here and think and worship God without it flowing into your actions being a natural outflow of your worship. So if you're genuinely worshiping God, the acts which would also be called works naturally follow.
Okay? So when we come in here and we sing and we praise and we give our offering, or we serve as a deacon and deaconesses and we perform community service, is that worship? Those are the acts of worship. Okay? And while I understand your point and I truly agree with you, it's kind of hard to separate. Because when you're truly worshiping God, those acts of service will have to come into play as well. Okay? Hope. Exactly. But if you're doing those without a heartfelt response to that, then it is not basically true worship. My brother.
Yeah, as we look at worship, one of the words you mentioned, honor, submission, reverence, and for service, fellowship, church service. But we notice as well the word honor that's in sovereignty. Worship is, the apostle tells us, to whom we yield ourselves servants to whatever entity. So worship is a position of the heart more than anything else. It's not so much an act. The act is what gives voice to worship. Reverence and submission and service and honor, those are voices that speak to what's in the heart. And so worship is a position of the heart. And it's a position that heart must stay with. Turn over the sovereignty of his life over to one that seems to be more valuable than himself. And so that turning over of control of sovereignty to a deity manifests itself in honor and reverence and obedience and so on. But it is very much a position of yourself. And when we pray, for example, we kneel, but we kneel to indicate that our heart has also meant permanently.
Amen. Brother Jason.
There's definitely a distinction that we do need to recognize when it comes to acts and it comes to what we call worship. And you can see that distinction actually in the commandments itself. It says, I am the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of bondage. And it says, thou shalt have no other gods before me. That's one. I think you see where I'm going. Next commandment. Thou shalt not make unto thee a graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. So here we're talking about an act, and then we're talking about who we're worshiping. Don't have any gods before me, only worship the true God. And then the fourth commandment is actually talking about the act of how we should proceed to offer that worship unto God. It's like Cain and Abel. There's a right way to worship, but Abel offered the right sacrifice, and Cain didn't. He offered the fruit of his own work. So true worship there's a certain design that God, instructions that God gives us in terms of how we should worship Him. And so it is important to have that distinction.
Amen, amen. You know, I feel like the Holy Spirit is really in this place because I opened my Bible and Exodus 20. I was going to read from 2 to 6 right there to make that. So, you know, to God be the glory. I will have to do that. Thank you for doing that. As we continue in our definition of what worship is, I want somebody to turn to 1 Peter 2 and verse 5. And if you haven't put your hand up, you'll get the mic and just read that for me, please.
First Peter 2 and verse 5. Ye also as lively stones are built up a spiritual house and holy priesthood to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God by Jesus Christ.
Okay, that's 2 to 5? Oh, just 5. Okay, that's good. All right. Yeah, so what are some of the things we see there, Peter, talking about? Okay, he's talking about lively stones. When you think of stones, you're thinking of building up the temple, right? Building up the temple, stone by stone or brick by brick. And here we are building up a spiritual temple for God. And it's talking about us as individuals, lively stones, and it talks about the holy priesthood, and we are to offer up a spiritual sacrifice. So the essence of worship here, that the epitome of worship is basically who we are worshiping. Who is the high priest? It's Jesus Christ himself. And of course it says acceptable to God. We know, as somebody mentioned here about Cain and Abel, they both gave a sacrifice. So there was the act. The act was perfect. Nothing was wrong with the act. But the heart, there's something wrong with the heart. Right? Something was wrong with the heart of Cain. Because he just gave, what he thought. It's not what God wanted. It's not what God asked for. It's what he wanted. And so it is when we come to worship. How are we worshiping God? Are we just coming because, we're just here? When we come into this building, do we feel an awe? As I studied this lesson, I see your hand down, Brother Shane, I'll come to you. As I was studying this week, and just the awesomeness of worship, and it talks about, we're going to get to it, but I'll just jump ahead a little bit. It talks about the loudness, and I'm not saying we should be shouting in here, but at the same time, when we worship, if we really truly believe something, if we really truly believe in someone, and the acts that they can do, and we reverence them, and we are in awe, in adoration, and we're going to go on as it talks about worship and how the angels worship. I look at my worship and I was ashamed. I went to God and I said, teach me, show me what to do, and make me obedient to your words. Because sometimes it's not because we don't know. It's because we are so entrenched with the things of this world that we cannot spend a good hour, 2 hours just in awe with God. We're there praying and we're thinking about the next activity that we are going to do. What else is on our agenda? And so God is not receiving our full worship. No.
Yeah, I was going to say, in light of what you were saying, you asked the question earlier, what is worship? And so people were answering that question. And then I was thinking, as Brother Richard had commented, Jason had commented, my mind went back to where genuine worship actually originates. And, God says in John chapter 4, in verse 24, he says, Jesus speaking, he said that God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. And so when you look at worship, genuine worship that's acceptable to God, in order for it to be acceptable, it always has to have the right motive. Because motive is ultimately what prompts worship to God. And when you look at Psalms 95, which gives us one of the motivations for worshiping God, Psalms 95 and verse 6, it says, "O come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker." So the motivation for worship here is because God is our Creator. And so when Jason was reading from Exodus, by the time you get to the Sabbath commandment, it tells you the reason why God is worthy of worship, because he is our Creator. But then when you read the same commandments repeated in Deuteronomy 5, it gives a completely different reason for keeping the Sabbath commandment. And the Lord says, because I am your Redeemer. So the motivation for worship to God, number one, should be because he is our Creator. and number two, because he is our Redeemer. And if we genuinely had a respect and appreciation for what God has done, then when we worship, it wouldn't look like a funeral call. I mean, it would look like a funeral train. I mean, our hearts would well up in genuine appreciation and thanksgiving to God because of what he has done for us. And I want to say this last thing. I'm going to read it to you. It's from 212 and paragraph 3. It says, many who profess to be Christians become excited over worldly enterprises, and their interest is awakened for new and exciting amusements while they are cold-hearted and appear as if frozen in the cause of God. Here is a theme, poor formalists, which is of sufficient importance to excite you. Eternal interests are here involved. Upon this theme, it is sin to be calm and unimpassioned. The scenes of Calvary call for the deepest emotions. Upon this subject, you will be excusable if you manifest enthusiasm.
Amen. Amen.
And so when we don't have that element, it shows there is something wrong. I'm not saying that, we're supposed to be up in here jumping down walls, but there should be some level of genuine joy and happiness when we come into the house of God.
Amen. Amen. Before you I'm gonna have to give it to JC here and then my sister over here. But I want to give you a brief little story I heard this week, and it just really, as we talk about enthusiasm, there's this pastor who gave this story to preface his sermon, and he said, his sermon was about the second coming of Christ, and he said that there was a Muslim man, he didn't say which country he was from, but he was studying, and then he studied and he found out that Christ is coming back again. And he was so excited that he told everybody. Then he also found out that the Seventh-day Adventists were people who were looking for the second coming of Christ. So he called to meet one of the pastors or elders or leaders in the church, and he did it. And he said, "Do you believe in the second coming of Christ?" He said, "Yes." And he said, "No." He said, "Do you believe in Christ?" He said, "Yes." The second question was, "Do you believe he's coming back again?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Where is the enthusiasm? What are you doing about it?" Because here he was receiving this truth for the very first time, and he is planning to, how is he now going to expand his gospel in order, his broadcast, in order to make everybody know. And then he said, one last question he said to the Adventist leader, he said, "Do you believe he's coming soon?" And the guy said, "Yes." And that's when he said to him, "What are you doing about it?" As we walk out here in this fire drill today, and we know it was just a drill, but had it been a real fire, had we seen the smoke coming in, would we have leisurely walked out here? Or would we have been running, and at the same time, not only to protect ourselves, but would we run downstairs? Would we shout? Would we call out in the building? Is anybody inside? When we talk about enthusiasm with the gospel that we have, the message that we have, the three-angel message, we are ice cold. We come into church, and I don't believe we ought to be jumping up and dancing and all of that. But I look around and I see dead people, dead people. That's what we come to every Sabbath. And I envy the person, I don't envy the person who sometimes have to stand up here and preach. And look at us, we're falling asleep. And we are the people with the end time message to tell to the world. And we come in, we drag ourselves in, and we have no enthusiasm. I don't think I'm talking just to you, I'm talking to myself. Okay? All right, we're going to go in order. Brother JC, Sister Annette.
I'm talking to myself also when I say this. There are clearly two aspects to worship. There's what we do and what we are. When Jesus was talking to the woman at the well, he said the time is coming when people will worship him in spirit and in truth. Galatians 5:22 to 20, well, I think it's 25 says, if you live in the spirit, also walk in the spirit. The text that you gave us, 1 Peter 2, I'll start with 4. It says, coming to him as to a living stone, him being Christ, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by God and precious. And we know Christ is the chief cornerstone. You also as living stones. So, as living stones, our life, our entire life is supposed to be worship to God. Every moment of every day, we live in a state of worship to God. It's important that we come aside and perform the acts of worship, praying and this church service and all those sort of things. But we too often, I personalize it, I too often forget that my entire life is to worship God and serve him, as Uche pointed out. Service is integral to worship, and it would behoove us to remember that. And if we would remember that moment by moment, even while we are performing the acts of worship here, then we can be more lively stones.
Amen. Amen.
All we're really going to do is echo Uche, as he mentioned the word joy. And the first thing that came in my mind was make a joyful noise unto the Lord. And quite often, like you said, we can see that we're not operating in that spirit of joy. To kind of piggyback off of what JC said, I too, we all have that issue that we have to, of course, submit it back to God so that he can help us. But in my walk on a day-to-day basis, I purposely, you hear what I just said? On purpose try to make sure that I'm operating with the spirit of joy. And it's amazing to me at this place called JOB that I work at, when I walk through that door, I'm having to sing and usher the Lord in so I can just be ready for all the different things that I'm having to deal with. It amazes me on a day-to-day basis how I have people walking up to me, telling me their problems, and I don't stand there and go, well, God said. They just see the Spirit of God right on. Because the joy and the prayer, and even if I'm having a down day, I may go, I need to go to the bathroom, I gotta pray. Lord, I need your spirit, I need your joy. Make a joyful noise unto the Lord. So I'm just encouraging everybody to operate in that spirit of joy and watch how things truly manifest itself. You'll feel much better, and you'll I guess you'll walk with a better pep in your step.
Amen. Sister Rosetta.
That I may know him. In order for us to worship the way God wants us to worship, we have to know him. Judas walked with Jesus on a daily basis. He didn't know him. He was not converted. Pharaoh said, who is God that I should let these people go? He didn't know. We can't be happy. We can't worship God in the spirit of love and joy. We don't know who he is. And he is the Word. He is the bread of life. And if we want to get to know him, we don't have to try to let our light shine, because if God's love and his light is in us, it will shine. It's like electricity. If you are in a dark room and you have a light bulb and you connect it up with electricity, you don't have to say, shine, light, shine. All you have to do is just connect it. If we are connected the way he wants us to be connected, we will have joy. We will have love. We will have unity. And we will worship him in spirit and in truth the way he wants us to. But the question is, maybe why aren't we getting to know him? But the one thing that is really true, and we can see that how many people wrote the Bible, it's unified. Not one part of it contradicts the other. These people didn't know each other, but there was a unity in the scriptures, excuse me, that they wrote because they were inspired.
So if we want to have unity in our church, in our home, in our lives, the first step is to become unified with Him. And then everything that we do, it will show the unity. We don't have to try it. Because if I'm connected with God fully, and you're connected with God, then when we come together as a group, as a composite whole, then everything that we do will show that everyone in there is connected.
Amen.
And there's nothing else we have to do, but our main purpose and concern is to get that connection
Amen.
for ourselves. Then the things that we say, the things that we do will show the unity, will show the love.
Amen.
And we will worship Him in spirit and truth.
Amen.
Amen.
I want to say praise God. And don't want to be the congregation to be too hard on themselves. Just want to repeat what I said this morning, that I see it happening amongst the congregation even now. Now, it may be at the blade stage, but that's more than what it was before. And if you keep nurturing this thing, it will come to its full maturity and fruit. But praise God that it is starting to manifest itself among the congregation.
Amen. And you know, I was out this week and I was in a store and somebody came and I don't remember how it happened, but you know, they asked me, how are you doing? I don't know the individual. And I said, I'm blessed. When I said that, she was walking with another person, and she said, "Did you hear that? Did you hear that?" She goes, "Thank you, my sister." And you know, I didn't know what she was talking about, but she started to talk to the other lady she was with, and apparently they were talking about discouragement in one way, shape, or form. And she said, "You don't have to, you know, you don't have to walk around like that because you're discouraged and you're big. You know, just take this attitude." And I was never always like that. You know, I remember sometimes people used to say to me, "Why?" Because I'm not really the type of person that's walk around laughing or smiling or even have a pleasant face sometimes. You know, I look miserable at times, even though I'm not really, you know, that way within. And people used to walk up to me and say, "What's the matter with you?" You know, on the job or whatever. And I'm like, "Nothing." And they're like, "Well, why's your face like that?" So I start to let my face, you know, show the joy that is within it. And regardless of what is going on, you know, I smile. I'm disappointed, I smile. You know, when something happens now, and I praise God for the growth, is that, hey, you know, you feel a little down because what you expected didn't happen or what have you, but then, you know, I quickly say, "Oh, you know what? God is in charge. God is in charge." And we move on from there. My brother.
Yes, sir. I want to say, worship is a lifestyle.
Sure is.
Everything we do, everything we say, everything that's in us should be worship. We forget that not only we are a spectacle of the earth and the people, but we also a spectacle in heaven, and by the angels, and the rest of the world. So, even when we're by ourselves, even when we are in our homes or wherever we are, that we are not a spectacle of the world, we're still a spectacle of the angelic hosts and of God. So true worship is pleasing Him in everything we do. Not just in song and praises, but in acts and deeds. When we come to our fellow brother man and we act a certain way that is not of God. We say things that are not of God. This is how we prove our worship. Whose spirit are we worshiping? In God's spirit or Satan's spirit? Satan is divided. God is united. So when we worship, it's how we come to each other, how we come and praise by interacting with each other. This is true worship. As my brother said, is spirit and truth. What is truth? What is spirit? Now, if we know these things, then as my sister said, we wouldn't have to make an effort to unite. We wouldn't have to make an effort to do whatever we need to do because the Spirit's in us. So obviously, can two walk together? Oh, that's the agreement.
Amen. Thank you. All right. We know that everything that God created or that He made or put in place, Satan, and we are not going to read it, we are very familiar with it, how sin started. And we can look at Isaiah chapter, where is it? It's Isaiah, where is it? Okay, Isaiah 14, 12 to 14. But we're not going to read that because we see that that is where, rebellion started in heaven. Satan craved and wanted the worship. And so we see that, and it says here, a little portion of Great Controversy, page 494, it says, Satan also knows the definition of worship, but instead of seeking to make God supreme in the affections and allegiance of his creature, he seeks to win their service and homage to himself. So there Satan was in heaven and he wanted worship. And, God threw him out, right? And he came to earth and he just folded his wings and he said, you know what? I got thrown over to heaven, so I'm done. Isn't that what he did? No, not so at all. Because we see he didn't stop there. But in Matthew chapter 4, verse 8, the third temptation, which I think she mentioned there, is that he is talking to the Creator himself. And he's saying, here he is, taking him up on a high pinnacle and saying to him, bow down. And that's what worship is. Bow down. Playing homage. And he said, bow down and give me worship. Because guess what? I deserve it. He has no claim on creation. He has no claim upon the God himself. But he is trying to usurp himself to be what? Be God. He wants to be God. But he doesn't stop there either. As we look in Revelation chapter 13 and 14, there, what does he do? He is, let's read Revelation chapter 13 and verse 4. I don't want to summarize that. Revelation 13 and verse 4. If you have it, just read it for me, please. I did see a hand there, but where it's coming from, but all right.
And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him?
Amen. So we see that worship is going to be the deciding factor at the end of the age. Let's go back to Daniel. You're not going to read it again either. Daniel chapter 3, talking about the 3 Hebrew boys. Here they were, and they were asked. Nebuchadnezzar defined God and the dream, the interpretation of the dream, instead of looking at the image and its division and saying head of gold, arms of silver, thigh of bronze, and leg and whatever, and see the different kingdoms that were going to take over. He says, no, I'm going to build me an entire image made of gold. And when we hear the music, those in quotes now, music. When we hear the music, you guys are going to bow down. But I'm so glad for the example of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And even if God had allowed them to be burned, would we still have that testimony? We would. We would still have the testimony. But God in His sovereignty knew that we needed, to know that they refused They refuse to pay homage to anyone else other than the true God. So we see that, and we know that in the end, that is going to be the final test. It is going to be, who are you going to worship? We're all going to have to make that choice. And you know, we're in here today worshiping. We're Seventh-day Adventists, some of us been Seventh-day Adventists for a while. And we say, oh, you know, no, I could not worship anybody else but the true God. You know? But when the test comes, and it will, you know, if we are not passing the test day by day by day, you know, I love that book, Creeping Compromise. You know, every time I get up here and I talk about it, because it has left such an indelible mark on my life. In that, everything, nothing happens just suddenly like that. You know, when you hear of somebody, you know, committing murder, you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that person would do such a thing. Guess what? It just didn't happen like that. They've been harboring the thought, you know, all the time until it mature and germinate and, you know, all of that until suddenly they're able to do that. You remember the first time you told a lie? I mean, little kids say things, but when you consciously, you know, told them, how did you feel about it? The shame. You felt, wow, I'm going to be caught. But you weren't caught, were you? And so what happened? You killed another one, and another one, and another one. And if you're not careful, will become habit. But before I, who has the mic? But okay, Brother Jason, then Brother JC, and Brother Richard.
And therein lies the reason why we need to ask the question, why should we worship God? And the final conflict, as you pointed out, there's going to be a union one way or another. There's going to be a polarization, and it's going to be those who are united for Christ or against Him. And what they have in common, in addition to the fact that they're worshiping the true God, is they have a common cause. And the cause is to vindicate the character of Christ. And it's very important that we do that, because it says in verse 11 of chapter 4 of Revelation, it says, "Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory, honor, and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created." And it makes me think also of Exodus, when, you know, He didn't have to leave them there for 420 years to suffer. He waited, He allowed them to suffer through persecution, and He did it for one purpose. It says here in Exodus chapter 9, verse 16, it says, "And in the very deed for this very deed, and in very deed for this cause have I raised thee up, for to show thee my power, that my name may be declared throughout all the earth."
Amen.
And so we have to keep in mind that the common cause we have is to vindicate His character. And He's going to do that with the people that are united and together and are one with Him, as we were pointing out, and producing His character in their lives.
Amen. Brother JC.
Someone has said that God is a gentleman and the devil is a cad. God will not compel us to worship Him. God will not beat down the door and just barge in on us. He invites us to open the door. The point that I'm trying to make here is that there's no middle ground. If you're not worshiping God by the way you're living your life, then you're worshiping the enemy. And the sad reality is that when Christ comes, in Matthew 7, I just looked it up, I think it started in verse 21, Jesus Himself says in that day that He will say, "Lord, Lord, we have waited for you," and so on. And I'm paraphrasing, but and He will say, "Depart from me, I never knew you." And these are people who thought they were worshiping God, but they weren't. they weren't doing the things that God requires of them. And so we have to be careful. I have to be careful that I am consciously, actively living the life in a way that's pleasing to God, because if I'm not, then I'm worshiping Satan and I'm crucifying Christ afresh by my actions.
And Brother Richard. Oh, he's at the second. All right, we're going to push along here because, we've only touched on a little bit about who and I hear about what, and a little bit on why, how do we worship, and we have to look at, one thing I love about the Seventh-day Adventist Church, wherever you go, as you travel around, you know that church is going to start at 9 something, whatever, and Sabbath school is around 10 o'clock, and divine worship about 11, and so on. And then the afternoon after divine worship, then the activity gets a little mixed up there. Some people have AY, some people have Bible study, or what have you. We also have the quarter, doesn't matter where you go, you have this, I like this. But the message that unites us, that's what I want to leave, in the next 5 minutes. The 3 angels' message that unites us, and how we worship. I want to touch a little bit on how we worship first, and then end with the message that unites us. And here I want to look at Revelation chapter 4, and we're going to read 8 and 11. So I'm going to just read that for you. And the 4 beasts had each of them 6 wings about them, and they were full of eyes within them, and they rest not day and night, saying, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, which was and is and to come, and is to come. Verse 11. Though I'm worthy, but Jason will read that. I'm not going to touch that. When we think about worship, and when I read this, it's not the first time, second, probably many a times that you've read this, and then, in heaven, the adoration, the praise, the bowing down, saying, Holy, holy, holy. It seems like it's an ongoing thing. It's continuous. And, we are here, and because of sin, we have to work, and we have to do all these other things. But how can we make this worship continuous in our lives? Brother David touched on it a little bit when he talks about, every act, everything that we do should be about worship. But how can we bring that home? How can somebody explain to us, I have to eat, I have to sleep, I have to work, I have to do all these things. How can I be continuously worshiping God? Give Brother Richard, and then you.
I just want to use the one word, distance. When we're looking at the throne room, it's the proximity of these beings to the throne of God that generates a response, and we see that their worship is a response to what they get told. And we have been trained to try to worship God from a very far distance. And I was reading a while ago in the Gospels of the Syrophoenician woman who came to Jesus, and God had on the Spirit. And she just saw him saying, "Give him authority." He said, "We cannot give the children's bread to the donkeys." She falls down and she worships. That is extremely important. We have to live closer to God, closer to Christ, so we can. That itself provokes worship. We discover it ultimately that worship isn't something we do. Worship is almost an involuntary response. Yes, there is. We have to make a decision to worship as well. That the closer we get to Christ, and the closer we get to God, and the closer we live to Him, worship is an involuntary response.
Amen. Brother O'Shea, since you're going to be the last one, you get to touch on a few things for me. We don't have enough time when we study the Sabbath lesson. But we talk about, I want you to mention the truth that unites us, because we are supposed to be united on the truth of God, the Word of God. Touch on also the message, the 3-angel message that unites us. This church, I always say to people, And you know, he said, where do you go? I said, I go to that. I go, where is it? In Dunwoody. Why do you drive 45 minutes to go there? You know, one of the reasons why I drive to come here, and I look forward to Sabbath here, is that I can say, you know, that when I come here, I'm not going to hear somebody's opinion on the word of God. I am going to hear the truth as it is written in the word of God. And that's why I come here every Sabbath. You know, that's what drives me here. And as a church, that's what should unite us, the truth and the word of God. And then we close up.
So going back to the first question really quick about how that evolved into daily life, I want to go back to the concept of motivation. The reason why nobody has to beg us to be selfish is because selfishness is a very great motivator. Nobody has to beg us. You don't even have to make an effort to be selfish, because you know we find those things that are in that realm to be pleasing and satisfying and so on and so forth. So in like manner, if worship is going to be this thing that springs forth continually, there must be something that calls it forth. And the thing that is to call it forth, and one of the reasons why we don't always have it, is because we really don't spend enough time thinking about the goodness of God. We really don't spend enough time, we spend all of our time sometimes thinking about all the negative things that are happening to us, and it's the reason why we don't have testimonies when we come into the church. So I would say how to have worship is something that's continual, is to keep your mind continually upon the goodness of God. And as you do that, it shall call for praise, not only in song, but in actions, in thought, in the way that we treat each other in every single respect, because you are keeping that motivator always before you. As Psalm 16:11 says, in his presence is fullness of joy. So if you lack joy, it might be because you're not in his presence, because that's where the source of joy is found. So that's speaking to that. And then to the other thing with the three angels' messages is going back again. It's you know, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Ultimately, it talks about those who will see a strong delusion because they did not receive the love of the truth. And I think ultimately, everybody who's in this room right now, they come to church every Sabbath, hopefully with the right motivation. And if they have the right motivation, it's because there's a love for the truth. There is a love for that message, the three angels' message, the cleaver of truth that has cut us out of the world, that has separated us. And it's because of that love for the truth that ultimately that we are brought together in close proximity. But not only that, not only a love for the truth abstractly, but truth is not something abstract, disconnected from God. But sometimes we can be in love with doctrines more than we are in love with the one to whom the doctrines testify. And so, but not only that, but having a love for the people who are still in the place that maybe we ourselves were at one time. And so we love the truth to the degree, not only because we love who it testifies of, but we also want that same to testify of others who have not yet had an opportunity. And that will unite us in evangelism, that will unite us in so many other areas.
Amen, amen. I praise God for that. Just this summary here, it says, worship is the Christian believer's thankful response to God for his gift of salvation. It is also an essential element of the Christian community's experience of unity and fellowship, which my brother mentioned. Without prayer and Bible study, in a desire to know God's truth for us, our community will fail to experience oneness in Christ. I see your hand up here running up. What time?
One word.
One word?
One word. Obedience.
Obedience. Amen. Amen. Let us pray to close. Father God, we just thank you for the time that we spent here. May we plant these truths in our hearts, O God. Not only that we may not sin against you, but we might shed light to this darkened world. O God, we that were once there, and you in your wisdom and your mercy and compassion has called us out. And O God, now you send us to call others. May we be obedient to you. Is my prayer in Jesus' name. Have a pleasant Sabbath and prepare for divine worship. What do we have going? 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, God bless.